week that revolved around the sprint. We spoke about the 4 sessions, the 4 meetings of a Scrum sprint. In those 4 meetings, we talked about the 30-day, possibly 30-day sprints, and how to go from the 3 different roles of the of Scrum to getting from the point of getting the sprint backlog all the way to their sprint retrospective. This week we're going to talk about we're going to make it a little differently, and we're still going to focus on agile fundamentals, but we're still going to stay with Scrum. And in this particular session, we're going to go from the point of view of the product owner, not the Scrum Master. We're going to go through product owner, and we're going to go from what's called the user stories to the sprint backlog, which is right before you start a sprint. My background is project management. I'm involved in multiple waterfall projects, as well as some Scrum projects. Currently, I am working in a large financial firm in New York City. So, with not much more to say in terms of introductions, let's start with, there are 3 roles in Scrum that we work with. That is the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team, also called the Scrum team. The product owner is the voice of the customer. He is the interface. He's a liaison between the customer and the Scrum team. The Scrum Master sits between the product owner and the development team, and he's a facilitator. He's a servant leader to the development team, and the development team is a small team of 8 to 10 people that actually perform the work. So keep in mind these 3 roles of the Scrum practice, the Scrum Framework. In front of you, you'll see the Scrum Flow, calling it the Scrum Flow. On the left-hand side, you'll notice that there is a gentleman with a little cloud above his head. We think of him as a product owner. He is the person who has a vision of the project. He is a voice of the customer, so he brings to the Scrum team, the Scrum team being the developers and the Scrum Master, he brings them the vision of what the product development should be, or what the final product should be. He has spent enough time with the visionaries, with the company owners, or with the clients, in trying to get product requirements or project requirements, and he is now in a position to share that information with the rest of the team. We'll come back to this document, to this view in a few moments. So going back to the Scrum Cycle. So the Scrum Cycle begins with what's called the project kickoff meeting. The project kickoff meeting, where the stakeholders or the clients meet with the product owner. In this meeting, there's a discussion, right? There's a shared vision. The product, the stakeholders or the clients, they share with the product owner, who could be a business analyst, or who could be a person he has to be a person knowledgeable of what in-house resources can accomplish or will accomplish. You don't want a product owner selling services that the organization cannot accomplish, right? So the product owner, this one individual, he meets over a period of time, possibly 24 hours, 3 weeks, just a long period of time, in trying to get a clarification as to what it is that they're trying to accomplish, right? So one of the things about Agile is that it gives you the ability to be adaptive to the client. If the client's requirements change from week to week, it is up to the product owner to keep track and to keep track of these changes for the client. So that if the client communicates that he wants to change directions in terms of what his product should look like, he will be there to document this and reprioritize the type of work that the Scrum team is doing. So one of the things that happens so what the difference between, say, an agile project and a waterfall project is that and a waterfall project is a lengthy process where there's a lot of planning involved, a lot of baselines get created, and we want to stay close to those baselines, and we do not want to have that scope creep, or because every time we change the requirements of a planned project like waterfall, it costs us time, it costs us money, right? So we don't necessarily want to make any changes to the scope. In Agile, in contrast, in Agile, you want to give the client the ability to change his requirements, and you want to adapt to or if the client is adapting to the market, then you want to adapt to the client, and you want to be able to change your direction, or the developer's team direction, from what the client is changing. So from every 30-day sprint to sprint, multiple sprints, the final product could change according to market needs or however the client feels. Right? So this is a very adaptable process. So one more time on the screen, right? The Scrum cycle begins with a project kickoff meeting. In attendance is the stakeholders and the clients, and the product owner who wants to understand what the clients want. The focus of this meeting is to determine the product vision and the scope of the product. It is also a high-level release planning meeting, where, for instance, the client may say, during the next 5 sprints or first quarter of the next year, we're going to be releasing the final version, phase 1. Right? 6 months later, in third quarter of next year, we're going to be releasing phase 2, which is, for instance, going from desktops to mobile phones or to tablets, right? We're going to go from iOS, and we're going to go to WinOS, and we're going to go to Linux. So there is a high-level release planning that takes place here, and this is set off by the stakeholders and the clients who give the product owner their requirements, who give the product owner their impression of what it should look like. So the product owner, having that vision, the product owner goes away for a period of time and has a lot of interaction with, again, the stakeholders. After he gets their requirements, he goes away and he builds this thing called the product backlog. The product backlog contains the project requirements now. In a format of user stories, the product backlog is a prioritized list, right, of all of the requirements or what he believes are the current requirements that the stakeholders and the clients and the people who are paying for the service. He has a prioritized list, meaning, again, going according to the release planning or the guidance from the individuals, saying that they want, for instance, iOS in the first phase. So the product owner then prioritizes those user lists, and I'm going to explain exactly what a user story is in a few moments. He prioritizes these user stories, right, so that the developers focus on those prioritized items first in the first few sprints. We'll talk about epics. Epics are more unrefined user stories that can be broken down or decomposed further during the composition phase of the sprint planning meeting, which we'll talk about in a few moments as well. So one more time. So the product owner, after getting the vision, he creates a product backlog. The product backlog contains project requirements in a user story format. This is the product backlog is a prioritized list, and that these user stories should be the great majority or the complete scope for the project. Right? Okay, so after the product owner puts this product backlog together, which could be a list of 100 or a few hundred user stories, right? So, and where he has them prioritized, at the top of the list should be the focus of the first few sprints. At the bottom of the list are the wishes or the added features that they may want down like a year from now or 3 months from now in subsequent input from the market. The client may change their needs. So this is like a wish list of something that they may want on their as a feature in the application. So the sprint planning meeting held after the product owner brings the product backlog to the team. The sprint planning meeting is held to review this product backlog, to estimate a sprint backlog in preparation for a sprint. In here, we defined the sprint backlog, meaning we identify what are the things that will be done during the sprint, and the developers now commit to a set of tasks. Remember, the sprint planning meeting is the first meeting of the Scrum Cycle that takes place. The others we talked about last week. The sprint planning meeting is the first, then is the daily stand-up meeting. The daily stand-up meeting is a daily meeting that the developers talk to the Scrum Master and inform them of impediments and also the work that they've been doing. So the daily stand-up is the second type of meeting. The third meeting is the sprint review, which is at the end of the sprint, at the end of the 30 days, the sprint review meeting, where the product is presented to the stakeholders and to get a level of acceptance of the features that have been developed. And then the fourth meeting is a sprint retrospective. So there are 4 meetings in the sprint cycle. Sprint planning meeting is the first meeting. Again, this is when the product owner brings the product backlog, and these user stories in the product backlog are reviewed, right? So one more time, in the sprint planning meeting, we review the product backlog. We estimate the items on the sprint backlog to determine the length of these items, these tasks, or the breakdown, like as you can consider work packages. So in the sprint planning meeting, we decompose to the lowest level of a unit, which in sprint we call tasks, but you may want to associate with work packages. We just define the sprint backlog, meaning we identify all the items that will be developed during the sprint, and we commit to a set of tasks that will be completed during that particular sprint. Okay, so user stories. What are user stories? So user stories are narratives that describe a need from the end user's point of view. They are features that may be requested or required by the client. User stories initiate and encourage collaboration, right, from the developers, and user stories initiate just-in-time efforts. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. Okay, so user stories are narratives that describe a need from the end user, right? So you have, what are end users? The end user is, say, a secretary. The end user is the salesman. The end user is a driver. Any end user or an application, please visualize an end user application. And they express their needs of an application through a user story. They express their needs as like, I need this. To do my job, I need this. So please put this feature in this application. That's the type of communication they will create. Going back to the kickoff meeting, right? When the stakeholders first talk to the product owner, they tell them, hey, Mr. Product Owner, I want this feature in this application. I want this feature in this application. And this feature that has been requested by our clients out in the mobile world, we want this feature. So the product owner then writes down all these user stories and creates a product backlog, right? So user stories are narratives that describe a need from the end user's point of view. The user story initiates and encourages collaboration. So this type of user story type of communication is what the developers are going to try to understand, right? As a Java developer, right? As a web developer, as a DBA, right? The best way to communicate the needs of the application in this very agile environment is to get a narrative from the user's point of view by the product owner, so that the developers have a clear understanding of what they need to do. right? So it encourages collaboration amongst the development team, the product owner, as well as the client, right? And user stories initiate just-in-time efforts. By this, I mean that during the particular sprint, during the particular time that the sprint is worked on by the developers and this highly refined team, right? They will be working on specifically and only specifically on the needs or the identified tasks that have been identified in the sprint backlog. A little more of that about this in a few moments, but basically, remember, during the sprint, the developers work on the agreed on tasks, right? The agreed on tasks for the period of time, the 30 days, that they will be developing during a sprint, right? These are, so they'll go back to the product owner and say, okay, this new sprint will be working on these items, which is the new prioritized list of the next sprint. They'll pull in more tasks to work on. They'll work on those items. At the end of the sprint, they'll go back to the product owner and the product backlog, and they'll pull more items, right? So it's a just-in-time effort. User stories should be easy to break down, plan, and communicate. User stories create value, right? User stories are meant to be the goal of the development cycle in Scrum should be always at the end of each sprint should be to release some potentially valuable feature that the client and the customer can use, right? That is the goal, should be the goal of every sprint. That is to release a useful feature that the client can use, whether it's beta, whether it's final product, but every sprint should have successful features accepted, right? It creates a value for the customer. User stories allow well-defined acceptance criteria, right? So in the user story, the product owner will communicate that in order for me, because please understand that the product owner defines the user stories, he writes down the user stories, he prioritizes them, he brings it to the developer, and he'll say, hey, Mr. Developers, please understand that I will accept and I will only accept these criteria as acceptable. And that's why the developers need to focus in getting clarification from the user stories in terms of what they'll need to develop. This clarification is critical for the developers to go away and start developing products, right? So a user story contains 3 pieces of information. First, the title, then a description, and then an acceptance criteria. The title is a statement, generic statement that is trackable, right? It's a short, clear, and understandable phrase that describes what we're trying to do. Nothing technical about the title of a user story. The description has 3 pieces, right? It has a feature of I as myself. I shouldn't have used the word title there. Apologies for that. It should be I as a role, want or need something so that a reason, right? So I'll have a little example in a few moments. And the acceptance criteria defines the user story's deliverable, right? So let's go back all the way to the kickoff meeting one more time, where the stakeholders tell the product owner and say, Mr. Product Owner, we're going to give you the money to hire developers to do 10 sprints or 20 sprints, but this is what we want, okay? So we want this feature, and this feature, and this feature, and they'll go on identifying 10 or 20 or 30 or 100 features or 1,000 features that they want out of this application process, this development process, right? So in it, they will define a deliverable. They will define the acceptance criteria that they will accept, that the stakeholder will accept from the product owner's team, meaning from the developer's team, right? So again, the user story contains 3 pieces: a title, a generic title that is short, clear, and understandable, It contains a description that has 3 pieces and an acceptance criteria that defines the user story's deliverable. A user story example. So say, for instance, the goal of my application is to develop, say, a mobile application for, say, people who sell real estate or people who sell mortgages, right, for real estate properties, right? So, so the user story is a statement like this. The title says, I want an interest rate search tool. Interest rate implies the percentage that the borrower pays to a bank in terms after having borrowed money, right? The description that says, I, as a mortgage broker, right, meaning that is my role, I am the end user, I, as a mortgage broker, want to be able to gather varying interest rates from different banks. That's the second part of the user story, so that I can offer better choices to my clients, right? That is the reason why I want this. So I want a feature that allows me to gather varying interest rates, right? So the feature means that the application needs to go out, to the internet and go to 3 different banks, pick up their current interest rates and come back and give them to me so I can present them. It says, and the acceptance criteria for this user story is defined as the requested feature should allow entering a property type, whether it's commercial or residential, date ranges, meaning I want the current rate, interest rates, meaning like within the last 30 days, perhaps the past 30 days or a week or 2 weeks, not last year's or not next year's, right? So I want to be able to get current dates. I want to be able to provide zip codes, right? A zip code meaning a region where these current mortgage rates are being offered. For instance, interest rates in New York are different than interest rates, say, in Florida or in Texas, right? Or in Chicago, right? So, and I want to be able to provide 3 different results. I mean, I want to be able to offer my client 3 different varying interest rates. So one more time. So this user story is provided by the client, by the stakeholders, by the person who speaks to the product owner, and he says, Mr. Product Owner, please go and develop a feature for for this mobile phone that provides us with a research tool, a rate search tool. And they describe the need of the feature, and then this is the acceptable criteria for the feature. Straightforward. So one more time, let's go to the Scrum sprint, the Scrum Flow. The product owner on the left creates the product backlog. Notice that says feature A, feature B, feature C in that blue column there, so the product owner comes to the development team, to the Scrum team, with a prioritized list of user stories, right? Then the development team, working together with the product owner, they break down this user stories into during the sprint planning meeting, and to the right of that, they create the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is now used as the basis for the sprint. All right. So back to sprint planning meeting. So 2 things happen in the sprint planning meeting. One of those things is object definition. Object definition are sprint goals. Sprint goals could be something along the lines of, hey team, during this particular, the resulting, well, let me start again. So the product owner will talk to the developers and say, hey guys, we need to release version 2.3 of the product. The client has been waiting for it. We're running a little bit late. Let's be on the same page. Let's stay on top of this. This creates an urgency for the developers. It creates a synergy with the developers so that they know, and the developers have a goal. Even though every sprint should have some kind of deliverable, but here you create some goals, and more specifically about product releases. The other thing, and this is part of the exam, in the exam they'll ask what are the two things that happen during the sprint planning meeting, or what are the outputs of the sprint planning meeting. The two things that are the outputs of the sprint planning meeting is, one is object definition and the other one is task estimation. Please remember that in the sprint planning meeting there is the developers speak to the product owner to try to clarify these user stories, right? And try to decompose these user stories so that they can work them, the developers can work on these user stories as work packages, right? The work package is the smallest package, and here in Sprint we call them tasks, right? So the developers need to estimate how many tasks a specific user story may require. Think for a moment, a task could be a DBA creating some kind of space, some kind of indexing, some indexing, or creating an interface to a website so that when the user clicks on some button, a form comes up and immediately information starts getting filled out, like 20 fields get filled out, and the DBA needs to absorb this information into some table space and needs to create indexes, and he needs to be able to relate that database to another database that is being created elsewhere in another part of the application. So that the DBA, he will be involved in this particular task, as well as, say, perhaps the web developer may be involved in this particular task. So, but it breaks down as to the smallest process or the smallest piece of work that can be accomplished by a team or team member. Okay, so it's like a work package. Okay, so one more time. So two things that are the outputs of the sprint planning meeting are object definition and task estimation. This task estimation is being the decomposing of the user stories into work packages, into tasks. The sprint planning meeting is an 8-hour meeting for a 1-month sprint. All right? So a 1-month sprint, and this meeting is attended again by the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team. The product owner is there to clarify the user stories. The Scrum Master is there to understand the synergy between the team and the team members, and the Scrum Master is making notes in terms of what is going to be needed for the sprint, right? Because the Scrum Master he's guided by the rules of Agile and rules of Scrum. He wants to keep everybody in line in terms of the framework of how this developer should develop. And the development team needs to get clarification from the product owner. That's why this is an 8-hour meeting where the product owner explains and clarifies each of these user stories to the development team. The development team then goes asks questions and clarification. They also estimate, but they also get an understanding of what's called the acceptance criteria, right? At this time, the developers are also asking from the product owner, they're asking them, well, what do you mean you want this table with 4 legs to be blue? What color blue? Or how long are the legs? Or how wide is the radio button on the website? Right? Or perhaps how fast do you want the application to respond, right? Is it milliseconds or is it nanoseconds? Is it a trading application? And is this critical, business critical, or is it a feature that a secretary needs that is not time constrained, right? So the acceptance criteria is discussed here because it is only features that have been accepted by the product owner that get to be shown to the stakeholders, right? We talked about that the last time, that when the developers meet with the stakeholders and the product owner during the sprint review meeting, which is the meeting that is held at the end of the sprint, right? The product owner has the capacity, or he's able to tell the developers, it says, no, you know what, this feature does not meet the acceptance criteria, so therefore it is rejected, and therefore go back to development and bring it up on the next sprint, right? So here during this sprint planning meeting, the acceptance criteria is clarified. when the product owner brings these user stories to the product backlog, he already brings there the acceptance criteria, but it is here in this meeting during this 8 hours for a 1-month sprint that the developers get to speak to the product owner to get clarification on what is meant as 5 millimeters or blue, a hue of blue that is unknown, or a radio button that should behave in a certain manner. One more time, going to sprint planning meeting, it is there are two things. Pertains to object definition, which relates to the goals of the sprint, and it describes what will be accomplished in this particular sprint. Task estimation, which as we discussed in a few moments, is more critical. Task estimation is critical to the development team. It is also critical to the success of the project. So what is task estimation? Again, it is a breakdown of user stories into tasks, similar to work packages and waterfall projects. It is based, and this is on the exam, in terms of what is the task estimation based on. It says it's based on risk, complexity, and time. Now this is there's also based on other things, but the three primary things that a task is based on is these things. So it's not time-based. You cannot, when the developers speak to the product owner, he does not, they do not assign a task value, right? In terms of time. For instance, they won't say that'll take me 4 hours, right? They won't say that'll take 3 people 6 hours or 3 days. They cannot say that. They will estimate the cycle time needed to accomplish a task based on these three things: risk, whether it is more critical as a feature than others, or is this not getting this task on time causes another Scrum team, which is working in parallel to develop this complete product for the stakeholders, right? Not having completed this task in time becomes an impediment, right, to another team. It also is the risk in terms of not getting this feature completed during the sprint will cause the client, $10,000 additional or $10 million, right? In terms of complexity, right? What is more complex than others in order to develop? When the developers develop products, they may develop products that are very simple to do, right? So if you're developing a website, the process of copying and pasting, say the look and the feel or the same colors of every page on the website is very simple, right? You copy and paste code into each page, and I'm thinking that should be very simple. But to write an API, say, to interface the application to, say, Bitcoins or some other payment system like PayPal or some other payment system is more complex. So when the developers speak to the product owner, again, in getting this clarification and developing this acceptance criteria for the feature, then they will say, okay, they will break down these user stories into tasks based on risk, complexity, and time. And then they will assign a number, a value, okay, to this task, right, that will be used to determine the velocity, right? It will be used to determine the amount of work that the team is willing to accept to do the work in this particular sprint, right? So if user stories are broken down, say 10 user stories are broken down into, say, 100 tasks, and the estimation, we'll talk about estimation in a future seminar, when the estimation gives us that those 100 tasks will take us, say, 320 points. Let's call them points now, right? So each task has a value, say, assigned a point value, right, based on risk, complexity and time. And together that number, that completed 100 user stories broken down into 300 points that the developers agreed to do during that sprint will be called now the velocity of the sprint. The developers build this thing called velocity. Further down, so in task estimation, it is also an interaction between product owners and developers. The developers are giving clarification on the user stories, and they will know how to break down the user stories into tasks. The definition of done is defined, well, it was defined earlier, but is clarified here. The acceptance criteria, the done factor of a feature is clarified and it's defined better here, because now the developers are taking on the responsibility of accomplishing these tasks. So, the sprint planning meeting, one more time, the sprint planning meeting, there are two things that occur there. One is objective definition and the other one is task estimation. The output of that meeting is called the sprint backlog, right? We looked at that a little earlier in that, let me see if I can go to the previous screen. 1 second, please. Here. So from the left, the product owner brings the user stories to the team in form of a product backlog. They're prioritized. Then he moves over to the sprint planning meeting to the right. In the sprint planning meeting, the developers and the product owner get clarification in terms of user stories, and they break down items into tasks. And these tasks are now build this thing called the sprint backlog, right? So we're in the middle of the screen right now, a thing called sprint backlog, right? So what is the sprint backlog? The sprint backlog is a list of resulting tasks, right? Because we have now decomposed the user stories into resulting tasks. Tasks that the development team agrees to perform during the current sprint. It is also the amount of work that the development team will accept to do during that sprint, because according to their abilities, right? According to according to how much they can do, and this is now implies something called a velocity, right? The maximum amount of work that the development team will accept to do will now be called the velocity. So that's where we are. I think I'm reaching a good period of time to perhaps ask some questions of you, and then I'm going to ask you to perhaps provide some answers to me, and then I'll try to clarify some of the issues, some of the items that I presented to you, and perhaps you have an opportunity to ask me some questions. Okay, so I'm going to try and get this done like this. So the first question to you is, who creates a user story? Is it the product owner, the Scrum Master, the development team, or the product manager? So I'd like you to please write down these answers for a moment. I'm going to try and see if I can fix this. Let's see, I'm over here now. Okay. I'm going to, so someone said, Mr. Frank, your voice is low. Please speak a little louder. Apologies about that. So, so I would like for you, the team, if you could, on the chat room, if you could just enter some answer pertaining to what, I have 4 questions I'm going to ask you, and hopefully you can give me back some feedback. So please open the question room. I've been asked. I apologize. Let me open up the question room. Okay, here. Okay, show answered questions. Okay, someone says the product owner is correct. Let's see what else somebody shows me. I have. Okay. I'm trying to open up this window. Apologies. I'm trying to see how my window opens up. Yes, exactly. Okay. I have good responses right now. Apologies, I'm trying to open up my window a little bit better and I'm not having too much success. Give me a second, please. Question and answers, chat, okay. So, Okay, so answer one, the product owner is correct. The product owner, the product owner, the product owner, the product owner, the product owner. Thank you very much. The answer is number one. Yes, I agreed. Right, the product owner is the person who writes down, this person, this gentleman, this lady goes away after getting the, the, the session. 1 second, there's another question, but I'm going to answer that question momentarily. Okay, I will answer that question. Manu, I will answer that question momentarily. But yeah, the product owner, right, comes to the team with a vision, right? He is the voice of the customer. And in order to share that voice of the customer and provide clarification, he writes these features into user stories. And he goes away for a couple of weeks after the kickoff meeting. He goes away and he literally comes back with a whole long list of user stories. These user stories may not be clear. These user stories may be something called epics, right? An epic meaning it is an unrefined type of question that is can be further broken down into additional user stories. So, thank you for the answer. The answer is correct. The answer is number one is correct. Question number two. Let's see if I can get this question. Sorry. Question number two says, how are user stories related to product development? So I'm going to be looking for your answer. How are user stories related to product development? So question number two. I'm starting to get some answers back now. Thank you. A few more seconds. Yes, exactly. So yes, so user stories are the functionalities and the requirements and the goals of the product, of the project, right? They are the shared visions from the stakeholders, right? There's a broken down requirements, right? They're not specific scopes, although they are developed by the product owner. They are related to the product development because they provide the functionality and the requirements of the project. Question number three. DT implies development team. Sorry about that. DT is a development team. I will interactively use PO for the product owner, DT for the development team, which is also the Scrum team, and then I will use also SSM for the Scrum Master. So I see some questions starting to come in. Okay. Good. Thank you. I see there is a little bit of that requires a little bit of clarification here, but that makes sense. Thank you. So the acceptance criteria, the answer for this should be number three, right? Okay, the answer for number three is option three, correct. Development team effort, that means the user stories requirement, right? So when the product owner builds these initial user stories, these prioritized user stories, right, he gets the acceptance criteria from the stakeholders, from the visionaries, from the clients, because he spends a lot of time during the requirements gathering period, right? And he gets these requirements, and then what he does is he gets the acceptance criteria, because he asks them directly. He says, what will be acceptable to you in terms of this feature? What will be acceptable to you in terms of what the developers will perform and will execute, right? So it is up to the developers to meet that acceptance criteria, and it is up to the developers to get further clarification from the product owner during the sprint planning meeting, because that is when user stories are broken down into tasks. Remember, tasks have no user stories in. They may be 20 tasks to a user story, or there may be 2 tasks to a user story, and these may be the acceptance criteria for the user story implies that all these tasks have to come together to make this acceptance criteria meet the requirements of that feature, of that user story. Question number 4. Yes, I will explain about work breakdown, and I will speak possibly. I will discuss possibly some breakdown charts and the sprint backlog a little more. So I'm getting some answers back right now. That's a good answer. Thank you, Manu. Rob says it could be both 1 and 2. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Thank you. Manu says 2 and 4. Good. Okay. All right. So the answer for this question number 4. Thank you. The answer to question number 4 is 2. It clearly defines what is acceptable for user story completion, right? Acceptable. Not so. It wouldn't be for sprint completion. Possibly answer number 4 is partially correct, because, but then again, you're certainly correct that a sprint may have a single user story that they work on. The developers may work on a single user story, but it is more likely that all the developers work on multiple user stories. And it accepts. So remember, each user story is a feature, and the acceptance criteria defines what is acceptable for each feature, for each user story. So the answer to that is number 4. Okay, so thank you. So Barbara, so what I'll do now, I believe this closes my session. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the floor for you to please ask some questions. I will try to answer them in as many as I can over the available period of time that I have. And please do not hesitate to ask anything relating to this or possibly even last week's session. Okay. Do not. Let's start answering the first question that was offered by Udara. She goes, oh, sorry, I apologize. So the question was, could you please explain about work breakdown charts and sprint backlog? I'm not sure I understand about the work breakdown charts. I think what you want to imply, what you want to talk about is decomposition, right? The breaking down of tasks, and possibly how the developers estimate the point system associated with each task. To answer your question, task estimation is a little complicated, and it's also a cultural thing, right? Different organizations use different methods for estimating tasks. You can likely redo a little review online, but I will certainly explain about task estimation during one of our future sessions, where the developers could use a method that does not influence one developer to the other, right? So it is meant to be perhaps anonymous, when one developer may say a task, it has a complexity of, say, 20 points or has a complexity of 3 points, right? Some developers may think that some things are easier than others, and some things may think that some things are more complicated than others. So that is how you see the breakdown being a lot more variable. So during the task estimation process, which takes place during the sprint planning meeting, right? When the developers are getting this clarification of the user stories, they're breaking down these tasks. Once they get the clarification of the user story, they can break down the tasks more easier, right? During that time, there is the session of voting or of identifying the point system for each task. And here it's very important that there is a consensus met. So when somebody identifies a task to be higher in points, like 21, say, and another one to 3, or 1, 2, or 3, say, a simple. So you pretty much the Scrum Master may ask each one of these individuals, or the developers may ask themselves, like, why do you think that that is so high, and why do you think that that is so low? So yeah, so it is a little more, it's a little complicated, and task estimation is certainly something that should be spoken about a little bit more. Next question is, what shall we call the acceptance criteria as definition of done? So shall we call the question is, so shall we call the acceptance criteria of definition as definition of done? Yes, that is the answer, right? So done, the clarification of done is also the clarification of the acceptance criteria. When something is done, it's accepted or it's rejected. If it's accepted, it's done. If it's not accepted, it's not done. And it goes back to the product owner so he can reprioritize this undone task. And also it could be reviewed by the stakeholders and could be reprioritized for the next sprint, right? The next sprint. The next question is, if the client insists that more is included in the current sprint than is possible, how is that managed? That's a great question, Barbara. So one of the things that occurs is that there are two things that occur in the sprint planning meeting, that is object definition and also task estimation. And the output of the sprint planning meeting is the sprint backlog, right? The sprint backlog now is the accepted tasks. Remember, each user story is broken into tasks. So it's the accepted tasks that will be performed by the Scrum team during that particular sprint. So it is a agreed upon number of broken down user stories for the sprint between the product owner and the developers. Not the Scrum Master, the developers. The developers will say, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. No, we're not going to be able to do that. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough cycles. We don't have enough personnel, right? So your question implies, can the product owner add urgent user stories or urgent tasks to the sprint backlog, or can the Scrum Master add more tasks to the sprint backlog, or can the stakeholders, meaning the owners of the project, meaning the owner of the company, meaning the client, can say, hey, stop that sprint, and please add this feature because we really need this feature for this as value. This feature needs to be done in the sprint. Please put it there, right? So the answer is, how is that handled, right? Well, the first thing that happens here is that the Scrum Master gets right in the middle of the person asking this of the developers and the client, right? And the developers, right? So he stands right in and says, no, you cannot talk to the developers at this time, because they are working in a mode, in an agile mode. They're working using these framework rules that imply that they have agreed to a task number that they will develop, and they will not be moved from completing those tasks, because they have created objectives for that sprint. And if they do not meet those objectives, that means that the sprint is collapsing, right? It's a failed sprint. So then the client can say, well, stop the sprint, otherwise I'm not paying you. Well, then the Scrum Master will go to the developer and say, all right, guys, let's stop the sprint, because the client does not want anything else done. So the sprint will stop in the middle or wherever it was the location of the sprint. And then you go back to the table to the product backlog. The product owner gets involved, speaks to the stakeholder or the client and says, okay, let's get clarification one more time. Okay. And you can remember, you cannot change these rules now, right? So let's get an acceptance from the development team and let's do this, right? So it's the only way. You cannot change, you cannot go into a sprint and change the goals, the tasks, and the objectives of that sprint. It becomes unsuccessful. I hope I answered that question. Let's go back. To. Thank you, Kathleen. So the next question is: would you say that the user stories in the Scrum methodology is in line with use cases? Yes, well, yes, they are, right? They are. A use case is a business need, right, or a business requirement. So the user stories certainly communicate the needs of the business, right? The needs of the features, right? But a use case could be an epic, right? An epic meaning multiple user stories, right? A use case can certainly be broken down to user stories. The next person, Manny, has two questions. Says, what is the point system? And second is, do we have any committee to evaluate user stories and requirements? Okay. To answer the first question, what is the point system? I discussed it a little bit. The point system is a task estimation process, right, that is associated with risk, complexity, and time. It is a value that is assigned to a task, right, to determine the amount of work. This is the point system is the value given to a decomposed user story, the tasks within the user story, and it is used to measure the deliverables that the developers can do during the length of the sprint. Do we have a committee to evaluate user stories and requirements? The answer is no. The answer is, well, the committee itself is the development team. The development team in Scrum and Agile are giving great powers. They're very autonomous. They are giving a lot of leeway. And if you go to some Agile environments, you'll notice that the developers are although there is no hierarchy there is no team lead or development head, there isn't, because it's a very horizontal environment. These are highly autocratic environments, very self-managed. And they can certainly manage all the requirements. So is there a committee team? I guess the answer is yes and no. Yes, because the developers themselves become the committee, and no, because there's no other roles in Scrum that are other than the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team. Next question says, sprint planning meeting will contain any attendees from the QA team? That's a good answer. Yes, the answer is, so the sprint planning meeting can have other individuals in there that may be brought in as third parties. Remember, this whole Scrum process, Agile process, is very transparent, right? And so the stakeholders, they may want to embed a whole QA team or test team within the development team, right? But they do not interact with the developers. They do not say, hey, let's change this or let's mix this. No, the answer is they're just there to test. They're not necessary because the development team is cross-functional, right? They will test their products themselves. They'll say, hey, Mark, take a look at this code for me. Or, hey, Mark, look at this feature. Are we integrating properly? So the answer is no. They may or may not. The next question. If we get a requirement change during the sprint, what will happen? The answer is no, it doesn't get done, right? The sprint can be stopped, and then we can go further back and reprioritize the features that the client will want. The answer is no. The developers could, though. In reality, the developers could add some pieces to a feature that may be necessary to complete the acceptance criteria that has not been defined, if they have time. If they do not have time, they will go bring it over to the product owner and say, hey, Mr. Product Owner, I believe that you really want this here. Okay, next. How do you report the estimate of the project duration? It seems very hard to have a definite estimate. Chin, yes, thank you very much. You are right. Estimation, we talked about that in the last session, right? Estimation in terms of how to bill a client in terms of effort is a very, very difficult thing to perform here. Sometimes development teams like agile teams will charge, say, per points, or they'll charge per man hours, meaning like you have 8 developers working, say, 40 hours per week. You have a scrum master and you have a product owner, and they together will charge. So if you just take some numbers and say developers are billed at, say, $50,000 a year or $100,000 a year, the scrum master is billed at $50,000 or $100,000, and so on and so on. And you can say, hey, look, we're going to do per hour, or per effort type of cost. So yeah, so that is a good question. That question should be opened up in another session, and perhaps that is a question that should be handled in a product owner's type of class, and we can discuss it in a future meeting. And there's a lot of literature on the internet pertaining to cost and project duration and project. Ultimately, there is no project duration set down, right? Ultimately, it's about the value. It's about the features. It's about providing value to a customer. And the customer's goal is to create some value for the clients. And yes, once that's done, then that will be the project duration. When the project, I've been to some presentations, and I've actually taught a class where one student said, hey, we use Scrum teams to just add features to a current project. So there's no way to build. There's just like in-house developers. Sprint planning meeting done in 8-hour meeting, or can be split into multiple meetings of total 8 hours? Yes, it can be split in multiple hours. What is the difference between Scrum Master and Project Manager? That's a good question. We spoke about that in the last session. The Project Manager's role is broken down into the 3 roles of Scrum: the Product Owner, the Scrum Master, and the Development Team. Each one of them takes on the tasks and the responsibilities of the Product Manager. Assume that we have 5 user stories to be completed in a sprint, but due to certain reason, 2 user stories are not completed. Will we then continue to the next sprint and include these 2 user stories? How will this be handled? Well, the answer is, if user stories are not completed during the sprint and the developers committed themselves to doing it, right, the sprint by itself will not be successful. While 3 of those features will be presented as value to the customer, yes, so those 2 unfinished user stories are then brought back to the product backlog, reprioritized, broken down into tasks, brought into the new sprint, right? So clearly here, the developers either underestimated what they could do, or they overestimated their abilities, right? They underestimated the time that they had, or the cycles that they thought they had, or they overestimated the amount of time that they have available, and so the resources were not completed, right? So yes, so the answer is they need to be reprioritized. Is testers included in the development team? The answer is yes. A third party could be embedded during the development cycle each day, so each individual can be and should be. Your code can be watched by somebody. Remember, this is transparent work, and there's versioning here. So when somebody submits versions of the product, then it's sitting there in some reservoir. So if the product owner wanting to make sure that the features get completed and accepted at the end of the sprint, then the product owner will say, we'll hire a third party and say, hey, third party, please go to this repository, pick up this code and test it. Do integration testing. So you can either embed it within the development cycle, or they can have an outside external vendor or external person or a quality assurance person just keep looking at the product while it's being developed. The question is, is Agile the environment for Scrum methodology, or what? How does Agile and Scrum relate? So Agile is an umbrella. Agile is the methodology, right? Agile means to be quick, to respond quickly to requirements, right? Or to needs, right? Scrum is one of the frameworks within the Agile methodology. Kanban is another framework to the Agile methodology, right? Feature development, feature-driven development, FDD, is another Agile framework that is within the Agile methodology. So Agile in itself, there's a whole thing about this thing called the Agile Manifesto, right? But within Agile, there's multiple different frameworks of how to develop, right? Kanban is a just-in-time process which does not have these cycles, right? There's development cycles. Scrum has development cycles. Agile is very continuous, right? Based on task acceptance is
My apology. Hello, Frank. My apology. We are going ahead with the time. If you see, we are already 10 minutes ahead.
Yes.
So, folks, I can see there are a few questions. The best option is we can reply these questions in your emails. And in the meantime, we can proceed with the session, and then we can reply your queries. So, Frank, if you allow me, can I take back the access from you, and then I can proceed with the rest of the presentation where I've left?
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and I hope that I was able to answer your questions. And please come and check me out in future settings. I'm looking forward to speaking to you again. Thank you. Yes, Raj, please take over.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I hope you are able to see my screen now.